Humblemud.
So, a few weeks ago, I talked about the video games that saved me during a difficult time in 2021. And in that video, I mentioned that there were some other games that played a big role in that time of self-discovery. You guys said that you wanted to hear what those games were, and so today, I'm going to be talking about them. Just like last time, I'm going to walk you through the chronological order in which I played these games, at least to the best of my memory. And so that's actually going to start us off with kind of an interesting one that I don't think any of you guys would have guessed, and many of you probably have never even heard of. The first game I'm going to share is Rygar: The Battle of Argus for the Nintendo Wii. Now, when I first started thinking back on this period of time and all the games that had an impact on me, this was actually one of the first ones I thought of, but at the same time I also kind of held back from wanting to talk about it because admittedly, out of the 5 games I'm going to be talking about today, this is probably the worst one out of the bunch. And yeah, while the game does have a pretty nonsensical plot, it's kind of weird that the princess in this game looks remarkably like Britney Spears. And for some reason, they actually redesigned Rygar for the Wii version. They basically made him look like the singer of Crossfade if he had like a Final Fantasy VII haircut. When I came back to it to get footage, I knew I had to include it. Now, the reason this game is so special to me was that this was a game that was just a white whale for me for a long time. I remember seeing this game in a magazine. It was like a paragraph or two and maybe 1 or 2 pictures that I'm sure were only like 100 pixels by 100 pixels. And just that alone, reading that description in that gaming magazine and seeing that picture really captured my imagination, where they were talking about this disc armor weapon that you could use, and the idea of using that with the Wii motion controls, because at this time Wii motion controls were still quite revolutionary to me. I hadn't really had a bad experience with motion controls yet. I thought that this game was going to be the end-all be-all like favorite game on the Nintendo Wii for me. And I'm not really sure what happened. I remember the classic Rygar games coming to the Virtual Console service, but I never got a chance to actually get Rygar: The Battle of Argus. So all of these years later, as I was trying to honor my inner child, Rygar: The Battle of Argus was one of the first ones I thought of. It's a reboot of the classic Rygar series, which saw games in the arcades, the NES, the Atari Lynx, all kinds of stuff. Rygar was actually sort of a proto-God of War. It was being made shortly before the God of War series actually launched, and unfortunately gets some unfair criticisms being labeled as a God of War clone. And while I think it's happenstance, neither one of them copied each other, technically Rygar: The Battle of Argus came before God of War did. So if you're a fan of God of War or Devil May Cry, I think you'll like this game. I don't necessarily think you'll like it more than those games, but if you are a fan of that style of game, and especially if you're a fan of the classic Rygar games, which are just goated, I think you'll enjoy this game. Now, with this next game, we're going to be entering what I call my happy console gamer phase. This was when I first discovered his channel and started really watching a lot of his stuff after I saw his Phantasy Star Online video. Phantasy Star Online and Skies of Arcadia totally could have been included in this list as well, but I wanted to talk about the games that I had previously never heard of before until I had watched Happy Console Gamer. So starting off this list, we're going to be talking about Fist of the North Star: Lost Paradise. If you remember in my last video, I said that I had put my PlayStation 4 in storage. Well, when I finished playing Disco Elysium and realized that there was still a lot of room in my heart for video games, that was when I decided to bring my PS4 out. But I wanted to try something completely new, and it was also around this time that I had seen Happy Console Gamer's review on this game, not knowing anything about the franchise at all, but something about it just intrigued me. Essentially, the universe of Fist of the North Star is the result of a fusion between something along the lines of Mad Max and Bruce Lee, if you gifted Bruce Lee shonen anime powers. He has the ability to trigger specific pressure points on his enemies and can cause them to explode just by tapping those points. While a power like that seems like something that only a villain would have, Kinshiro is one of the most kind-hearted, sweet people you're ever going to meet, and you'll learn that pretty quickly once you start playing this game, and he's just a joy of a character to follow. This is a licensed game, obviously based on the Fist of the North Star franchise, built within the Yakuza engine, and so this was also technically my first Yakuza game. I have to say, because a lot of times in the Yakuza fanbase, this game is kind of just written off as a silly spin-off. This one is still my favorite one so far. I spent more time in Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise than I did with Yakuza Kiwami. I really loved the mini-games in this game, and I also greatly identified with Kinshiro's character. I think this game is super underrated. I will say that the first couple of chapters are not very good. They don't give you a great impression of what to expect in this game, as most of the sequences are just one-on-one fights or maybe you versus 2 or 3 thugs. But once you actually get into the city of Eden, it becomes so much more than what those initial chapters of the game might lead you to expect.
Thanks, dude!
So I'm not sure if there is a better game to refer to as a happy console gamer game than Phantasy Star. The story of how I got into this one was actually pretty funny. Of course, Johnny talks about these games all the time, but I didn't actually have a plan to play it anytime soon. However, there was one weekend where my fiance was out of the country. She went to visit her family, and I suddenly had this weekend to myself where I had a lot of time and no obligations. I knew I was going to play some video games and stay up late and take way too long to do my chores around the house and all those kinds of things. It was sort of my rebellion period while she was gone. So anyway, I had dropped her off at the airport and said my goodbyes, and I went and grabbed a pizza and I got home. So I sat in front of the couch, started eating some pizza, and tried to decide what my weekend was going to look like. Well, in my Watch Later playlist, I had Happy Console Gamer's video called Best Gaming Night. And in that video, he basically talks about how his wife was out of town, he had a lot of free time to himself, wasn't really sure what to play, and decided to revisit Phantasy Star via the SEGA Ages version that's on the Switch. And the more I was watching this video, I was like, you know what? Now's a great time to try this game. Like, why not? The game was super cheap on the eShop, I had no other obligations, and so I just dived into it. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a big Happy Console Gamer fan. Phantasy Star is amazing. I honestly think it's probably better than the original Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy. There's so many cool things that you can do in this game, and I don't want to spoil it, but I was constantly impressed and in awe with the things that this game was able to achieve in 1987. I love the combat in this game, I love the characters in this game, I love the plot twists and how the world opens up to you and the different vehicles that you can take control of. How much stronger you feel by the end of the game, especially in comparison to the beginning where almost anything you face has the potential to be a threat. And above all else, the first-person dungeon crawling is so cool. I don't know why more games don't do this. It was kind of mind-blowing to see, and the SEGA Ages version adds a lot of quality of life features like a mapping system, your characters move faster, they level up faster, and so you can really just get into the meat of it all and not really face some of the same hurdles that kids were facing in the 80s. And so I really think, especially for a modern gamer, for a first-time gamer, this is the best way to play this game. And again, really similar to Johnny, I actually played this game for like 5 or 6 hours straight, staying up really late, and then got up the next morning bright-eyed with so much energy and played it as soon as the sun came up, and I beat it by about lunchtime the next day. So I pretty much replicated Johnny's experience, but not because I was just trying to copy him or anything. I genuinely fell in love with this game when I played it. Really loved the music, really loved the graphics, especially in the battle scenes, and I still think about the story of this game pretty often. Now, this is the last Happy Console Gamer game on this list, and it's a big one. Shenmue was an absolutely life-changing game for me. At this point in the year, it was the summer and life was really busy, and for some reason, when I dove into this game, I realized that it was the perfect experience for what I needed, given the pace of my life at the time. Everything felt like it was going so fast and I couldn't keep up. And then here is this game which requires you to be pretty patient. While the protagonist Rio is hell-bent on revenge, trying to find the man who killed his father, at the end of the day, he's just a young man, and he only has so many resources, and not a lot of people in the town around him are necessarily helpful or have any clues to give him. So the way that the story of this game rolls out is very slow. It's a slow burn game, so it absolutely expects patience from you. However, if you stick with it, the world just slowly builds on you and builds on you and builds on you every single time you come back to it, and then you're just immersed. The music in this game is hypnotic. It gives it a sort of surreal feeling, even if nothing is really happening in front of you. And the interactions that you have with the NPCs in this game, which, by the way, all of the NPCs in this game are unique. There is not a single NPC that looks just like the other. You'll find yourself living in what feels like a living, breathing town based off of 1986 Japan. And the thing that was really mind-blowing for me is that the entire time that I was running through the different locations in Shenmue, I thought that I was in a sort of approximation of a Japanese location. So you can imagine my surprise when I was stuck at one point in the game and I wanted to look up something, and I typed in something related to Dobuita and realized that every location in Shenmue is based off a real place, and in a lot of cases it's a pretty much one-to-one replica of these real-life places, especially when you compare them to the state that they were in the 80s. Shenmue tried to do so many things, and while its high budget kind of contributed to the fail of the Dreamcast, I would say, and opinions on this game are mixed, like yeah, the voice acting can be pretty funny sometimes.
I want to ask you about that man. Oh, that man. Hey.
Hey, mister! Wanna play with me?
There really isn't anything exactly like Shenmue. Yakuza gets pretty close, and if RGG Studios ever took a hold of the Shenmue franchise, I think they would do a great job continuing it and hopefully finishing it. But at the end of the day, there's still really not anything like Shenmue out there. And honest to God, it entered my top 10 games of all time. I was so nostalgic for Shenmue literally like a month after I played it that when I was at work, I listened to a no commentary playthrough of someone else playing that game just so that I could feel like I was back in that world again. I listen to the music from this game all the time, I think about this game all the time, and I can't wait to play Shenmue 2. I'm just kind of waiting for that right time. And speaking of the right time, Super Mario Odyssey is the last game that I'm going to be talking about today. If you knew me in real life and grew up with me as a kid, you would know that I am one of the biggest Mario fans that you are ever going to meet. That's a story for another day, but just trust me on that. I am a huge Mario fan, and I have been my whole life. Super Mario 64 is one of my favorite Mario games of all time, and honestly, Sunshine and Galaxy never really quite got the same feeling out of me that Mario 64 did. Now, when Mario Odyssey came out, I actually didn't have a Switch yet, but I had seen so many people saying that this is the sequel to Super Mario 64. This is the best 3D Mario since Mario 64, and it got me really excited. And when you look at screenshots and gameplay and things like that, I do think Mario Odyssey resembles Mario 64 more than Sunshine or Galaxy do. And so when I finally did get my Switch in 2019, I believe, one of the first games I got was Mario Odyssey. I think it was actually the first AAA game that I got for the console, even before Breath of the Wild. And I entered Tostarena, and I loved the vibe of it. It felt very familiar, but something about it just didn't click. I don't know. Like, I think I got a couple moons, and I never picked Mario Odyssey back up again. However, something about the combination of the games that I played prior to this, especially Shenmue, where you have this slow burn appeal to it and they're very high stakes and it's very grounded in reality, something made me think Mario Odyssey would be the perfect counterpoint to that. Something whimsical, something cartoonish, something just fun and easy to pick up and play. And this time, I was determined that I was going to give it a fair shot. It was when I got to the Wooded Kingdom where everything finally clicked, and Mario Odyssey became the game that I was hoping that it would be. Now, I'm not going to spoil what it was exactly in this level that made me feel this way, because if you haven't experienced that yet, I don't want to take that feeling from you. But there is a particular place within the Wooded Kingdom that you can access often by accident, I would imagine for most players. And when I landed in this place, I was just taken aback. I was like, man, this game is taking Mario in places that he's never been before. And from there, from the moment that I got into Wooded Kingdom, accidentally discovered the place within the Wooded Kingdom that I'm talking about, and beat the Wooded Kingdom, I was going at a breakneck pace in this game, and I beat the entire thing within a day. I went all the way through, steamrolled this game, and still to this day, I can't quite decide if I think Mario 64 or Mario Odyssey is my favorite 3D Mario game of all time. Super Mario Odyssey is expertly made. The movement mechanics are so cool. I love how it can actually get pretty complex. Using Cappy and taking on the gimmicks of the various Mario enemies is so fun. The worlds you visit are so cool. Mario Odyssey really leaves some big shoes to fill, and I hope that Nintendo takes what they learned with this game and takes what they learned with Bowser's Fury and makes the ultimate 3D Mario game that surpasses them all. I'm really hopeful for that. I'm really hopeful to see what Nintendo does next with Mario, because Mario Odyssey really planted a flag in Mario's history as a high point within the franchise. And while I sometimes want to berate myself for not seeing that at first, playing a game like Shenmue, where I realized that game came to me at the perfect time in my life, made me realize that sometimes you just need to be in the right mindset for a game. And that's totally okay if you're not. It's natural. At that moment, I was finally ready for Mario Odyssey. So as I said, these games were games that saved me. I was in a recovery period at this point, slowly turning the tides around and moving more towards an upward trajectory. And when it comes to the games that I was playing, I needed something that continued that for me. I needed to know that there were more than just those 5 games that I had gotten into in 2021. I needed to know that this wasn't a phase, that this wasn't a fluke, that there's still more for me to discover out there, games that are new to me. It didn't matter the era, what mattered was that I was still making new memories. With Rygar, I learned that honoring my inner child and finally giving him some of those things that he wanted so badly back then, but never got a chance to experience, can be so rewarding. And I'll never forget that this was the first game that I really did that for myself with. Lost Paradise got me into a new kind of gameplay loop that I had never experienced before, the kind that is uniquely like a dragon. And simultaneously, it really exposed me to the world of classic anime, because the furthest that I had really moved back at that point was just Dragon Ball Z and Pokemon, like the stuff that I grew up with. Similar to Fist of the North Star having roots in an older anime franchise, Phantasy Star taught me that there's still lots of classic games out there too that are going to catch me off guard and blow me away. If you noticed, out of the 10 games that I've talked about for this series, Phantasy Star is the oldest and probably one of the most mind-blowing experiences I had out of the bunch. And I think that's remarkable. Shenmue took me on an experience unlike any other and allowed me to slow down during a hectic period in my life. It also made me think a lot about your mindset and how it relates to games, and allowed me to also be kinder to myself during those moments where a game doesn't necessarily click for you. Because it is frustrating when everyone else seems to love something and then you get into it and it's just not really working for you. While Shenmue came into my life at the right time and was something that I was going to latch onto so much more than I expected, Mario Odyssey was that obvious thing that I should have latched onto from the very first moment I played it, but didn't. These two games actually played a sort of dual role with one another, teaching me about how my brain thinks and how whatever's going on in my life at the time can influence my experience with a game. And so when something is clicking, I should embrace it, and when it's not, I should be kind to myself and move on to the next one. Through all of these games, I learned that regardless of the year that they came out, regardless of the platform that it originally released on, regardless of what other people think about them, there's a whole world of games to explore, of games to fall in love with, of games you've never even heard of, but they might be what you need. These games solidified for me that there is still more out there to discover, and it started that hunger within me to start playing more. I really hope you enjoyed this video and stayed with me during this last rambly section. If you're still here, thanks so much for watching, and as always, stay humble.